Yes.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming. It's a beautiful day outside, and you've chosen to come indoors, which is a tribute to your fortitude. It's really lovely out. We'll enjoy it a bit later. We had gotten through about a half of the list I gave you last time of the expressions, but before I get to more expressions, the ones we didn't get to, I'd like to start off doing something a little different and deal with names, personal names of individuals from the Hebrew Bible, and not common names either. Do you remember the name Beulah? How do you know Beulah? Where have you heard Beulah?
Maid, yeah.
What?
She was a maid.
She was more than a maid. It was Ethel Waters, the great jazz singer. And she was like a counselor to the help or anyone else who needed it, a very wise woman. And her name was Beulah. It was, I think, on Sunday afternoons, maybe on TV. Don't remember, but Ethel Waters. But there was also an actress. Oh, I'm not plugged in. All right. Am I plugged in now? No. Oh, the little light didn't go on. Oh, I see you press in. No. Well, I do project well. I think you'll hear me, but you need it for electronics. Is that it? Beulah Bondi. Do you remember Beulah Bondi from the movies?
Yes.
Like in the 40s? She was big stuff. And in fact, her last performance was on the the Waltons. The Waltons, and she must have been in her 90s at that performance. She was a very good character actress. But Beulah has an interesting biblical story to tell. And at the same time, I'm going to talk about another name, perhaps less familiar, Hepzibah. Now, Hepzibah is what it is in Hebrew, but comes out in English, Hepzibah. And who was Hepzibah? Do you remember Silas Marner?
Oh, yeah.
George Eliot? Thank you very much, Doreen. Well, Hepzibah was a little tot wandered into the life of this lonely miser, Silas Marner, who had just lost all of his gold. Someone had stolen it. And in its place came this golden-haired child that wandered in during a snowstorm. And he adopted her, and so they had to find a name for her. So they suggested, well, what was your sister's name? He said, well, my sister's name was Hepzibah. So his friend said, well, that's quite a mouthful. So she was named Epi. But Hepzibah is the name. Also, do you remember the great violinist, Yehudi Menuhin?
His sister was Hepzibah.
His wife, I think. Sister was Hepzibah, which takes as long to say as a minute waltz. She was a pianist. Thank you. All this wonderful expert technical service, much appreciated. Thank you, Doreen. Let's see. Oh, can it go down? No, it doesn't. All right. Well, I think it'll pick me up because I project.
Yes.
I'm used to, at Hunter College, I would speak in big auditoriums without benefit of microphones, and I just bellowed, and they heard me. especially when I said this is going to be on the exam. Listen very carefully.
Very careful.
Yes. Well, Hepzibah and Beulah both come from the same verse in the book of Isaiah. Beulah actually means married with a husband. And Hepzibah means my desire is in her. I love her. My desire is, she is my delight. Now in Isaiah we read, the prophet is giving comfort to the same people he was hollering at in earlier chapters and saying, you're going to get it, keep it up and you're going to get it. Well, now he was giving them consolation. Nechama. And the prophet, speaking in God's name, says, no longer shall it be said of you, no longer will you be called forsaken, and no longer shall it be said of you, of your land, desolate. No longer will your land be called desolate, but you shall be called, she is my delight, Chefzi La, and your land shall be called wedded, namely with a husband. Now, not that there's anything wrong with being single, you have to understand what it means in this context. And in this context, land, because the word eretz, Adamah, is feminine in Hebrew, so you refer to it as she when you're talking of the land. And having a husband when you're speaking about land means there's somebody there who will help maintain you, will look after you, make sure you're weeded, make sure you're watered, make sure you're planted with seed, make sure that you are harvested on time. And so, really, a land with a husband means cultivated and watered, just the way this gentleman lovingly takes care of his garden. And that in Hebrew is be'ulah, be'ulah. And that comes into English as Beulah. And it's, in biblical law and in ancient Near Eastern law occasionally, the husband has legal obligations to the wife. It's not always this story, oh, the wife is just chattel and the wife is his possession, and not so at all. You hear those analyses from people who have never read the book called the Bible, but they saw the movie. Not enough. All right. A husband is supposed to provide the wife with food, clothing, and the third one has been mistranslated for years, but what it really means is cosmetics in the sense of lotions, moisturizers. Now, in a Near Eastern context, this is not vanity to put on lubricating unguents and all of that. Otherwise, if you don't put on the softeners, skin softeners, you'll wake up in the morning and your face will break. It's dried out. So it's not a vanity thing, but it's considered more medicinal than cosmetic, these moisturizers. But that is what... now, the verse was mistranslated for years. Food, clothing, and conjugal rights. That would only be thought of by a man. That this is her desire, and you have to fulfill it for her. And of course, it's the other way around, usually. But the correct way of translating it is food, clothing, and unguents. Well, that's what it means when you have a husband. You have someone who will provide these necessaries to you. And that is the point. Otherwise, the status of women in terms of their status in law was such that you better have a man to represent you at law and speak for you because women did not have the same rights as men did before the law. And before we snicker at that, how it wasn't that long ago when women couldn't vote in this country either. So we would go ha 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 at the primitive Near East. We were pretty primitive here ourselves for a long time. So you have be'ula, wedded, someone to look after you and maintain you. Speaking of the land of Israel. And chepsiba, this new relationship between God and Israel, where instead of hollering on them, my desire is in her. She is my delight. So these are two names, Beulah and Hepzibah, that are straight out of the Bible and are transliterations. In other words, Beulah and Hepzibah aren't translations. They're just put into English pronunciation. Be'ula becoming Beulah, and Hepzibah becoming Hepzibah. Anybody know any other Hepzibahs? I gave you my two best shots. No? Okay.
I know there's a first name in Moroccan ladies.
Yeah?
That's very common in Morocco. Hepzibah with a bit. There's no bit in Morocco.
Yes, because under the influence of Arabic, yes.
Yes.
But absolutely, that's a common name. Well, it's a beautiful name. I delight in her.
That's a common name. In Spanish, amongst
Better than battle axe. You know, it's...
But they call that in short, it's short of Hepzi.
Okay, that's good to know. Do you think it's still done today?
Good.
Yeah? Good. Interesting. Thank you. How about Ichabod? And everybody knows who Ichabod is. Who is Ichabod?
Crane. Goofy boy.
Ichabod Crane in the legend of the Headless Horseman, right? Washington Irving. Ichabod. Do you remember? I'm sure it's been a long time. It's been a long time since I first read it. Do you remember how would you describe Ichabod Crane? Do you remember?
Kind of goofy.
Skinny.
Well, not so much kooky.
Goofy.
Oh, gooky.
Goofy.
Oh, goofy. Well, he was as goofy as a fox. He managed to get invited to dinner. He was the local schoolmaster who has been called in to town from Connecticut. And he managed to get invitations to dinner at the houses that had the best laid tables. So, goofy not entirely like a fox. Let me give you the description. He's tall and he's lanky and he's skin and bones and he is not an imposing figure. And I'm sure his students in the classroom would draw pictures of him on the blackboard when he was out of the room. But listen to Washington Irving. His head was small and flat at top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long snipe nose like a beak, so that it looked like a weathercock perched upon his spindle neck to tell which way the wind blew. To see him striding along the profile of a hill on a windy day with his clothes bagging and fluttering around him, one might have mistaken him for the genius, the spirit of famine descending upon the earth, or some scarecrow eloped from a cornfield. You get the picture of Ichabod Crane. And he had a very different estimation of himself than the rest of us had of him. He was, which is very comical, that he has no idea how other people see him, which isn't so well. Now, Ichabod comes from the Hebrew Bible. Kavod, which means not glorious, inglorious, or where is the glory? When the Israelites had lost a critical battle with the Philistines, Eli, the high priest, died. He died because he went into shock when he heard that the Ark of the Covenant had been captured by the Philistines. This was the holiest object in ancient Israel, was the Ark of the Covenant that held in it the tablets, if you want to think of it as the Ten Commandments, but other things as well. And the Philistines have that. Now his widowed daughter-in-law gave birth, and at this moment, and she called the baby, "Where is the glory?" Inglorious, ikavod, saying, "Gone is glory from Israel, for the ark of God has been taken." Now, if you have a figure like Ichabod Crane, certainly cutting an inglorious figure, it's a perfect name. So that's Ichabod. What was Scrooge's name?
Ebenezer.
Ebenezer. Now, from Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Well, Ebenezer is Even Ha'ezer, which means the stone of help, of deliverance. When the Israelites were fighting the Philistines and gained ground, and they were victorious up to a certain point, a stone was erected there to say, up to this point, God has indeed been our deliverance. So it's a very, it's a monument to in gratitude for God's help in battle. Now you have Ebenezer Scrooge. Why should he be given a name, the Stone of Deliverance? Why should he be given such a name? The way he's described in Dickens, he's a rather mean-spirited fellow.
Kind of a miser, yeah.
Miser, nasty, exploitative, poor what's his name? Crane? Bob Cratchit. Bob Crane is from the TV, right. Bob Cratchit, and of course the ever-optimistic little...
Tim.
What was his name?
Tim?
Tiny Tim, not the ukulele playing Tiny Tim. And, always saying, "God bless everyone," which is, very nice, considering he himself was very physically challenged. Well, I was thinking about it. Why give him a name, Ebenezer, which talks about divine deliverance? You have to go to the end of the story. What happens to this wretch, Ebenezer Scrooge? He has visits from the ghost of Christmas past, and the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas future. And when he sees what a mess he's made out of his life and other people's lives, He reforms. And so this is a sort of divinely sent help to transform and rehabilitate this miserable Scrooge to a very respectable Ebenezer Scrooge. All right, these are some strange biblical names that have come into English, but now I'm going to get to back to our list. We had gotten to from sea to sea, and while which is a way of saying, in terms of America, the entire continent, and the same with Canada. That's the state motto of Canada, from sea to sea is Canadians' national motto. The Assyrians and the Babylonians also described their empire as from the two seas. The Philistine Sea, they called it, which was the coast of the Mediterranean, and the Sea of Reeds, which was to the south. So the south and west, and the west, but north all the way up to Lebanon. So this business of using the seas as your national boundaries came along a lot before, from sea to shining sea. In Psalm 72, God promises the descendants of David's line, who will be the kings of Judah, that he will rule from sea to sea, from river to the ends of the earth, from river, water, to the ends of the earth, the dry land. A lot more ambitious than just specific seas. Now, I'd like to get to the next item, helpmate. Helpmate, which means an appropriate partner with whom to share your burdens, a helpmate. Now, you remember we talked about flesh pots? And I told you the word flesh pots starts off as two Hebrew words. The pot in which you cook the meat, flesh pot, meat pot. But in translation, it was made into one word, flesh pot. And it didn't take long. Hi, Steve. Didn't take long before Israelite tastes moved from boiled beef to other pleasures. And so flesh pots is usually means that part of town where you can satisfy your desires for things other than boiled flanken. Yes. Okay, well, helpmate is also the result of combining two Hebrew words in the biblical text into one word, and then its meaning changes a bit. In Genesis chapter 2, talking about the creation of woman, it says, in the King James Version, 16:11, the Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I shall make an help meet for him. A help meet for him. Meet in earlier English meant fitting, appropriate, matching. And so, help and meet, Ezer kenegdo, a help that is his exact counterpart. I must say that in the perennial battle between the sexes, depends who's reading scripture. When male chauvinists read this, they said, she's a helper, a helpmeet. There's a plumber, and there's the plumber's helper. The plumber makes a lot more money than the plumber's helper. That's a way of justifying speciously a superior privileged position by calling the other one a helper. Well, that's wrong. Maybe that works in English, it doesn't work in Hebrew. Esa'eni el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. I lift my eyes to the mountains. Whence cometh my help? He's talking about God, the deliverer. Now, God is nobody's assistant. Nobody's helper in the sense of, yes, what do you call it? A junior plumber or whatever? Assistant plumber. An apprentice plumber. In English, in Hebrew, help is the source of your deliverance, the one you need to succeed. And it refers to the deity as your help. In Babylonian, ancient Babylonian, the word retsu, which means helper, also refers to the deity. So you can't take English meanings when you read the Hebrew Bible and read them into the Hebrew, because you're going to get bad results, erroneous results. So help meet, a help appropriate, matching, equal and opposite. A help meet. The words were run together like flesh and pot became flesh pot. Help meet became helpmeet. And from there it was a hop, skip, and a jump to helpmate.
Doesn't it say on the Hebrew side that a helpmate, when he first creates Eve as a helpmate for Adam, on the Hebrew side it says a helpmate against him, meaning to
That's an even worse translation.
to guide
The
him.
Hebrew word is neged.
Okay.
Neged in Hebrew means opposite,
Okay.
but in front of you. Not against you necessarily, but in front of you.
So when you
Opposite to you.
So when you make bad decisions, the woman will be there to correct you and guide you.
Really? Well, if I were you, I would tell him off in high dudgeon. Yes, no, that's Ezer Kinegdo is the Hebrew. A help, a source of deliverance, matching. Neged in the sense of here and here, matching. Okay. Helpmate. How about an ivory tower? An ivory tower is supposedly what professors have, a place where it's very isolated and comfortable, and nobody's going to bother you, and it's luxurious. Well, it doesn't start off with that meaning. An ivory tower is the way the lover describes his beloved in the Song of Songs. Your neck is like an ivory tower. And what it's speaking about is the smoothness of polished ivory, the lightness of polished ivory, the gracefulness of the lines of the polished. That's what it's talking about. So it's a description of his girlfriend. But you got to be careful when you say, darling, your neck is, like, what could I say? The Bunker Hill Monument. It can switch from a compliment to, something else very quickly. You got to be careful. It's even worse when he says, My darling, your nose is like the Tower of Lebanon, looking out toward Damascus. That's edgy. That's a nose. Okay, now, much later on, in 1836, a French literary critic wanted to criticize a contemporary poet who sort of was very elitist and exclusive and really avoided any contact with the world or any responsibility to the society in which he lived. And so he coined the phrase, that poet lives in an ivory tower. The words are biblical, the meaning are from 1836 in France. But don't worry about it. Most professors don't have ivory towers, so you shouldn't worry yourself about it. I had a professor at Columbia used to put a sign on the outside of his office door that the professor will be not be holding office hours today as he has passed away. Which,
Good reason.
but he was clever. He signed it, Departmental Secretary Karen Hapuch. Now, if you knew your book of Job, you know that Karen Hapuch was a daughter of Job, not a departmental secretary at Columbia. So you wouldn't take the words quite literally. Sometimes he'd write, "Do not knock, high explosives, TNT." It was great. It was great. You'd knock on the door, you'd hear from inside, "Oh," he was British, "why don't they leave me alone? I can't do my work." And he'd open the door and say, "Oh, mother, it's you. Do come in. I have some cigars. We'll smoke." So I was a privileged character, thank goodness. How about the land of Nod? The land of Nod. When Cain was expelled after he killed Abel, he went to live in the land of Nod, east of Eden, a phrase that has its own history, that marvelous novel, and or is it a novel or a short story? East of Eden, I don't know, but James Dean, Raymond Massey, what's her name? The one who played Joan of Arc.
Ingrid Bergman.
Ingrid Bergman? No. Ingrid Bergman could have played the queen that ordered Joan of Arc's execution, but she wasn't the victim type, except emotionally. Anyway, great movie, great novel. The land of Nod is a biblical pun. The punishment of Cain for dirtying the soil with the blood of his slain brother. His punishment was, you will never spend very much time on the earth, on the land. You'll be constantly a wanderer and a wayfarer. Na vanad. Nud. Someone constantly on the move, with no particular goal in mind, just moving. So, it's a nice pun. If you interpret it literally, Cain went to live in a land called Nod, or Cain went to live an existence of a Nod, of a wanderer. And now, Jonathan Swift, the great satirist in English literature, took it a step further. And the land of Nod, using the expression to nod off, like when you fall asleep during a particularly boring lecture. Jonathan Swift said he went into the land of nod, in the sense of that kind of nod, you nod off. So that land of nod has been double punned through the Bible and subsequent literature. What's a behemoth? A behemoth.
Big.
A beast of monstrous size, which is more mythical than natural. In the book of Job, God is speaking to Job and saying, you know, there are a lot of things, mister, that you don't know about. Like these creatures that I created, Behemoth and Leviathan. They are monstrous of proportions. Behemoth and Leviathan are like those Japanese movies from the 50s and early 60s, Gorgo
Godzilla.
and Godzilla. Yes, which was terrible movies, just terrible. Because in the 30s, they made King Kong. And if you remember, the gorilla, the dinosaurs, they moved so naturally and so beautifully that you were really in this primeval world. Come the Japanese right after World War II, and they make these movies where Godzilla looks like a man walking around in a pair of Godzilla pajamas. That's what it looks like. But anyway, Behemoth, I'm going to concentrate on Behemoth. Behemah in Hebrew is cattle. So this is some sort of a bovine, some sort of a cattle creature. But it seems to have been written by the poet who wrote the book of Job, who had heard about but never seen a rhinoceros, a hippopotamus, never seen them, but had heard tell of them, and so combined these monstrous creatures into this fictional creature, the behemoth. Just consider Behemoth, whom I created, God says, as I did you. It consumes grass like cattle, vegan. But strength in its flanks, there is strength in its flanks. It's not like a docile cow. There is might in its muscular belly. Its tail switches like a cedar, and the sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. Its bones are as bronze pipes, and its limbs are rods of iron. It is the first of God's works. Only its maker could approach with a sword. It lies beneath the lotus and the cover of the marsh reeds. That sounds like a hippo. But these strong flanks and everything, that sounds like a rhino. So I don't know. They encompass it round about and offer their shade, which is true. If a hippopotamus can't find water in which to submerge itself, it becomes terrifically sunburned and suffers terribly, if not worse. So it is talking about a hippopotamus, about a rhinoceros, but the biggest bovine you could think of, but none that you've ever seen. John Milton's Paradise Lost, the monstrous being appeared on the sixth day of creation, not the first day, the way the book of Job says. Behemoth, biggest born of earth, upheaved his vastness. Do you remember the professional wrestler Gorilla Monsoon? Good for you. I love the professional wrestling. because, they weren't trying to kill each other. Professional boxing, you're trying to give your opponent a brain concussion. I don't want to see that. I want to see you pretend to give a brain concussion to the other guy. That's enough for me. And Gorilla Monsoon, after his career as Gorilla Monsoon, he was a big man, became an announcer of the commentator on the fights, if you want to call them, and he would describe great big fellow wrestlers as a behemoth, and no one ever corrected him. And if you saw his size, you'll know why. No, sir, that's behemoth. The behemoth is what it stayed. I cut something out of the Times. Lately, there's a lot of things I'd like to cut out of the Times. But anyway, here's from Business Day, overtaking a behemoth. The word still lives. When Apple made gains in taking over a lot of the business of Microsoft, so overtaking a behemoth, Microsoft was the behemoth, and Apple's was trying to knock him off the throne. But it's used today, and if you didn't know about behemoth, you wouldn't know what they're talking about. The Times always made claim to be more literate than the Daily
There's
News.
somebody over here.
But yes,
My grandmother used to call someone a behemoth.
yes.
Is
No, not a monster, a behemoth. It's like when you call someone that cow, it's ungainly, it's uncivilized, it's a cow.
But it's not related.
No, or a bull in a china shop. Is what you're saying. Not very graceful. I had a professor at Columbia, his native language certainly wasn't English. And when he wanted to say, he wanted to describe one of his colleagues as a bull in a china shop, it always came out like a Chinaman in a chimney. But we know what he meant. Yes. All right. So let's get back to that's behemoth. Leviathan I'll talk about at another time. That's a whole other subject. But what's manna from heaven? What's manna from heaven?
Does anybody know?
Well, you're righter than you may think. You're absolutely right.
Nobody knows.
Because manna comes from manhu. What is it? Excellent. You know your scripture. Have you been visited lately
Dr.
by
Dodes.
Jehovah's Witnesses?
Dr. Dodes. Dr. Dodes.
Oh, very good. May rest in peace.
Yeah.
Richie Dodes. Yes. Manhu. What is it? Because they didn't know what it was. The Israelites were wandering in the wilderness. Epis, they got hungry. And so they're saying, oh, you remember the flesh pots? We used to sit next to these great big vats of boiled beef. It wasn't exactly, the good old days weren't exactly as good old living as a slave in Egypt, but they used to say, oh, we wish we were back then. We had plenty of food to eat. Yes, but you worked a 20-hour day slaving, and yes, you got some food, but... So God sent these, our ancestors, these ingrates, who were liberated from slavery, sent them something to eat. And what was it? When the fall of dew lifted, I'm reading from the book of Exodus. When the fall of dew lifted, There over the surface of the wilderness lay a fine and flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. And when the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it? Manhu?" For they did not know what it was. It was like coriander seed, white, and it tasted like wafers. We don't know how to translate the word. Like something dipped in honey. So that's what it was. In the book of Numbers, they add some details. The people would go out and gather it, grind it between millstones, or pound it in a mortar, boil it in a pot, make it into cakes. It tasted like rich cream. Well, if they were ingrates about being freed from slavery, they were ingrates, what? Manna again for dinner? You know, genug schon, it's enough. So, in the Talmud, they wanted to sing the praises of this biblical manna. So, whenever the Israelites ate it, they found in it a whole variety of flavors. When you ate the manna, it could taste like anything and everything you liked. And they also added, the manna tasted different to different age groups. So I don't know, if you give kids Raisin Bran, they're not thrilled with it. But we older folks have a healthy appreciation for Raisin Bran. Anyway, that is in the Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. Fair ladies, you drop manna in the way of a starved people. You bring unexpected good fortune. Now, it originally means food for the hungry. In Shakespeare, it's a financial boon. They get they inherit a very nice legacy, and it's referred to manna from heaven. And if you knew your scripture, you'd know what he was talking about. That's very good. Richie taught you that?
Richie taught me a lot. Smart man.
That's good. How about milk and honey? Synonymous with the land of Israel. Milk and honey, yes. Huge oil reserves, no. Milk and honey, yes. And milk and honey are symbols of richness. The milk doesn't refer to your 2% or your skim milk. It's talking about heavy cream. And the honey is talking about not NutraSweet, but something very, very naturally sweet. So it's milk and honey, intense in its richness, is what it means. And the book of Job says, let the wicked never enjoy the streams of rivers of honey and cream. So now we know where to find the honey and the milk. It flows by in streams. It's a very old image. And if you want to trace it back to about the year 1400, before the Common Era, which is probably 1,000 years older than when you have it used in the Bible, a little less than 1,000 years. The god Baal, the storm god, has not been doing his thing and making storms and causing rain. And so there is a drought and there is a famine. But the famine will come to an end. And how do they know that? Because the great god El, head of the Canaanite pantheon, El means God, so the head of their pantheon is Mr. God with a capital G. He had a dream, and in this dream, in the dream of benevolent El, the kindly one, in the vision of the creator of creatures, this is Canaanite, not Hebrew, the heavens were raining oil, the wadis running with honey. Here's that river image, but also a rain image. Now, the text says oil, but it's not oil like from the ground, black gold, Texas tea, as they say on the Beverly Hillbillies. It's oil as in like real greasy food, fried food, and you eat it, yes, it drips down from the side of your mouth. Again, it's the fatness of the meat. Look, why is a rib steak often preferred to a rump steak? And I'm not talking about kashrut right now. But why? Because the rib steak has a lot of fat on it. Therefore, as you cook it, it lubricates the meat, moistens the meat, and the meat is softened and very delicious. All right. So fatty meat today is the worst thing you can say. Never mind to a vegan, but to anybody. Oh, look at all the fat on that meat. It will clog your arteries up. And cream. No, you have skim milk, or almond milk, or all these milks you see that never came from a cow. But it's, when my grandmother wanted to compliment somebody's soup, she would say, a soup like an oil, which made we kids, it made us, a soup like an oil. But what she meant was a fatty soup. A chicken soup that you didn't just wave the chicken over it. You cooked a fat chicken in it, and the fat had risen to the top, and it was very, So it's a sign of richness, milk and honey, that goes back a long, long way. And today, of course, you wouldn't want high butterfat content, or you wouldn't want sugar. So times change. There's nothing new under the sun. Well, this contradicts it. This is something new under the sun, when these things are not considered something positive. In the book of Ecclesiastes, which is which is the most depressing book of the Hebrew Bible, and it's like a motto that there's nothing new under the sun. It's part of the author's negative outlook. Tradition says it was written by Solomon in his old age, when he was looking back upon life and saying, it wasn't so hot. What he's saying is that there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing. What was is that which will be, and what has been done is that which will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. In other words, life is boring repetition. It's such a depressing book. I was supposed to teach at Hunter College a course called Job, Ecclesiastes, and the Human Predicament. Well, I talked about Job and I talked about the human predicament, but I always found a way to avoid talking about the book of Ecclesiastes by talking about the book of Job too much. And we ran out of time, thank God. And they'd say, why don't you teach? It's supposed to be. You're supposed to teach Ecclesiastes. I said, if I read that book and studied it with you, I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning to come and teach you. Why should I? It doesn't make any difference. It's all going to be the same anyway. I'm going back to bed. I said, I don't dare read that book when I'm trying to hold down a job. So, anyway, Ecclesiastes also gave us vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Now, vanity means different things in English. A vanity can be the little table where you put on your makeup. Vanity can be your narcissistic self-love. You're overly self-proud. But vanity originally meant nothingness and utter futility. Things that aren't worth anything because there's no substance to them. It's like a breath. There's no substance to it. You can't touch it. You can't see it. You can't do anything. If you stop breathing, you'll know. But the breath itself is insubstantial. And when you've expelled it, it's gone. There's not a trace of it left. Unless you had garlic for dinner. But that's something else. Vanity of vanities, futility. Nothing is worth anything. So why bother? Well, whoever wrote the book couldn't leave it like that. I added a verse at the end of the book that said, but the fear of God, reverence, holding God in awe, that is the beginning of wisdom. In other words, there is some positive thing, but you couldn't leave it like that. I mean, it was depressing everybody. The Hebrew word hevel is how the King James translated vanity. King James Committee translated vanity. It's when you think something is something, but it turns out to be nothing. It's hevel. Havel havalim. Vanity of vanities. Now, this business of comparing it to a breath goes way back. The Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh. Mankind's days are numbered. Whatever they do is nothingness. And the word nothingness is really, literally, wind or breath. Whatever they do is just wind or breath, which is there for the moment and then gone. And this was advice, if my memory serves me right, that Gilgamesh gets from a bartender, a divine bartender, but a bartender who always gives you good advice. And say, you're Gilgamesh, you're looking for something that'll give you eternal reputation. You're looking for something that'll give you immortality. If not real immortality, then at least in people's minds. But he wanted real immortality. What we have, mankind, is a breath. Here today, gone seconds later. And so that idea, of that very pessimistic idea, comes elsewhere from the ancient Near East, but I can assure you that the book of Ecclesiastes is not typical of the Hebrew Bible, which is usually optimistic if you hold God in awe and act accordingly. Then you have every reason to be optimistic. But Ecclesiastes, yeah. So nothing new under the sun. is the same kind of denial of anything good. Now, you've heard the title, The Sun Also Rises, Hemingway. What do you think that means? Never mind what the book is about, but when you hear The Sun Also Rises, what do you think that means?
Always going to be another day.
Like the great philosopher Scarlett O'Hara once said, after all, tomorrow is another day. Yes, you'd think it means that today the sun has set, but that doesn't mean that the sun won't rise tomorrow. And so there's cause for hope and optimism. Is that how Ecclesiastes used the phrase, no way, Jose? No. It is interpreted that way. But Hemingway, when he gave that as a title, he knew exactly what it meant. What it means is, and the Hebrew does not have also in it. The Hebrew has the sun sets, the sun rises. What else is due? The sun sets, the sun rises. The sun sets, the sun rises. What do you think tomorrow the sun's going to do? It's going to rise. You know what it's going to do tonight? It's going to set. It's this, and at the preface of his book, The Sun Also Rises, which is how I know Hemingway knew what this meant in the biblical sense, he quoted the following passage from Ecclesiastes. One generation goes and another one comes, but the earth stays on forever. The sun rises and the sun sets. No, also. The sun rises and the sun sets, and then seeks out the place from which it will rise once more. The wind heads south and then turns back to the north, and ever turning makes its rounds and then heads back again. Cheerful, isn't it? Well,
sounds like predetermination.
What?
I said it sounds like God's predetermination. It's just going to happen, and that's the way it is.
Yeah, it's very stoic. Yes, but it's going to happen, so get over it.
Yeah, live with it.
But the point is, it's going to happen over and over and over again till the boringness of the repetition is going to drive you out of your gourd. Well, only read the book of Ecclesiastes if you're in a very good mood. But if you start off reading it when you're depressed, you're only going to go down further. How about by the skin of your teeth? The skin of one's teeth. The last time I looked, there's no skin on my teeth. There's no skin on anybody's teeth. And that's basically what this means. I escaped by something such a thin margin, you can't even see it, and it's questionable whether it even exists. That's how I squeaked by. And Job says this, my bones cling to my flesh and skin. It's like when you say it's all flesh and bones. My bones cling to my flesh and skin, and I escape by the skin of my teeth. Now, ingenious biblical commentators who say, well, there is no such thing as the skin on your teeth, have tried to find out what this means. And some say, well, what it means is the gums. That's what happens when a prosaic mind translates great poetry. I escape by my gums. Beautiful poetry. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Yes. It's unfortunate. What scholars have been trying to do is to look to see maybe the Hebrew text isn't right. Maybe in the course of copying it, some letters dropped out, and if we had what the text really was written as originally, it would make more sense. This makes perfectly good sense to me. Does the title, Skin of My Teeth, ring a bell to anybody here? Close. It's a play. And it's a play by, I'll tell you in a minute, Thornton Wilder. And it's a symbolic play, The Skin of Our Teeth. It invokes the biblical book of Job, but it tells the story of narrow escapes made by its own hapless victims, who are called George and Maggie Antrobus. Now, Antrobus is hunting on anthropos, the Greek word for man. So this is every man, and every man gets through by the skin of their teeth. Yeah. Are we ready to say goodbye? Well, then I'll give you one more.
No.
You shouldn't know from what I'm about to say. Poo, poo, poo. The valley of the shadow of death.
Well, fear no evil.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. How does the psalmist know that death has a shadow? The shadow of death is not unlike the skin of the teeth. It's poetic, but the point is, as famous as these lines are, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. The idea being, no matter how dark and gloomy my situation, how precarious, how dangerous, I'm going to be all right, because you, God, are with me, and I need not fear the shadow of death in that valley. Of course, who says that the shadow of death only appears in a valley? There are little suggestions here that this doesn't make a lot of sense, but it is read to this day at funerals because it mentions death. In translation, it mentions death. Death is not in the Hebrew. Neither is shadow. Shadow of death is made up by taking a Hebrew word, cutting it in the middle, making two words out of it. You take the word salmut or salmavet. You cut it in half. Sail, oh, that means shadow. Mavet, that means death. Salmavet, shadow of death. But there ain't such thing, because the word is salmut. And what salmut means in Hebrew is, well, salmavet is exactly what it means in ancient Babylonian. Darkness. Even if I am walking through a dark valley, now valley makes sense. What is a valley? It's surrounded on both sides by sheer cliffs. If you meet a lion when you're walking through a valley, you're going to have to do something about that lion, because you can't get away. There's a cliff here, there's a cliff here. There's no way. And if you run, a lion also can run faster than you. So, yea, though I walk through a dark valley, because it's a valley and there's no escape from it, in the darkness, should there be people lurking there to ambush you, or an animal lurking to ambush you, you can't see it and take whatever measures, like feet don't desert me now, which is the only thing you could do, and you shouldn't, because then they chase you for sure. It's a little bit of information I get from watching those nature shows on the PBS and BBC. If a bear is coming after you or a lion is coming after you, don't run. That's all they have to see, is that you're running, and they're going to come get you. All right, so yea, though I walk through a dark valley, a valley where I can't get out of it, and where I can't see what's there, even in such a precarious situation, I fear no mishap or evil thing to happen to me, because thou art with me. And that's what it means. Now, is this some newfangled modern interpretation? Not a bit of it. The medieval biblical commentator, Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, who lived in France and also had a vineyard from which he processed wine. He was a vintner, as well as the most prolific commentator there ever was on the whole Bible and the Talmud. Commented on every line, just incredible. Now, around the year 1100 is when Rashi would have, he wrote, every time the word Salmavet, not Sail and Mavet, shadow and death, but Salmavet, one word. Every time the word Salmavet is used in the Bible, it is speaking of darkness. As already explained by Dunash ibn Labrat, Dunash ibn Labrat, or Ben Labrat, was a poet and a lexicographer, a medieval grammarian of Hebrew. And he lived earlier than Rashi. And so Rashi is quoting Dunash, who wrote a treatise on Hebrew grammar and the meaning of Hebrew words. It's a classic, around the year 1000, well, earlier, probably closer to 700, I think 800. So this isn't something new. But the King James translation has enshrined this valley of the shadow of death, which again, logically doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. How come the shadow of death is only in a valley? And who says that death has a shadow? How do you know that? But yea, though I walk through a dark valley, that you know. A funeral is meant to comfort the bereaved. It can't do anything for the dearly departed. No one can at this point. But you can comfort the mourners. And so here you hear that someone is saying in the book of Psalms, even if I was directly facing death, which I see before me, the dearly departed, I wouldn't fear it. So don't fear it. This loved one has died. You will die too, but don't fear it. Those words are meant to comfort. And if it's not actually in the Psalms, and if biblical scholars won't agree that there is a shadow of death in the book of Psalms, that's their problem. The expression, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, has given comfort to many a mourner. That's what it was supposed to do. And biblical scholars, all right. Thank you so much for coming. And this is our second installment, so we just did it.
And Chancellor, I'd like to know more about the divine bartender that you spoke about.
She made a Long Island iced tea. It was so good.
It was wonderful as always. I myself feel so proud of our history that after today, knowing that we come from poets, we really come from
Even when we're speaking prose.
beautiful language, beautiful
Yeah.
language. And maybe we can get you to do another one. I know you're going to be busy, but maybe. But please come and join us for a little nash.
Be delighted. Thank you all.